Well, hi, welcome along everybody. Today we're looking at how to set up a pneumatic spear gun. We're looking at the ropes and knots to set up and how to tie some of those knots if you're unfamiliar with them. Now also I've done a review of this gun here, the Salvamar Predator Vuto, in another video. If you want to go have a look at that, there'll be a link in the description down below. But this video we're going to look at how I've set this gun up and compare that to another gun that I've set up if you want to learn how to do that. Right, so let's get into it. Alright, so these are the spear guns in question. I've got three pneumatic guns here. You've got your small SEAC C Pro, you've got your Cressy SL 1 meter, and your 85 centimeter Salvamar Predator Vuto. So this is the one I've just done the review of. But today we're going to look at the setup and how these strings are set up for a pneumatic gun and how to tie those knots. Right, so firstly let's have a look at the Salvamar 85 centimeter. So this one has got a reel. It's a little bit simpler than the Cressy, so I'll go through this one first. So I've got the reel, I've got 15 meters of braid on the reel, and I've actually put that through this loop here on the right hand side, and the rest of this thread hooks through the loop on the left hand side. So it's sort of tried to separate the systems. Now what I've got here is a length of bungee cord, so this can stretch to over double its length, and it's quite strong. So it'll hold a fish. The reason why I have that there is that I can stretch, well, it helps to load the gun because I can stretch that loop over the little thing there. But also when you shoot the spear out, it cushions the blow a little bit. When it hits the end, it'll sort of expand a little bit. And also when there's a fish on the end, the fish fights the rubber rather than your hand, so it helps to tire the fish out. So you can see here then I've got 1, 2, 3 wraps around, and then we go down the end here to a bowline knot. So if you want to see how to do a bowline knot, I'll show you now. So the first knot we're going to look at then is the bowline. This has been used for thousands of years on sailing and things like that. It's used for making a loop that doesn't slip. It only works on ropes and braids, not nylon. So the first thing you do is you work out how big you want your loop to be. Then you make a little loop here, like this. Put the rope through that loop, around the back of your line, and then back through the loop the same way, and then pull it tight. It should look like that. So then you give it a bit of a tighten from both of these sides. So there it is, a bowline. It's a very, very, very strong loop, and I use this all the time in my spearfishing. The other advantage is it can be tight for years and years and years, and then if you want to undo it, you just have to pull the two ends there and there, and it just pulls apart. So in an emergency, if you're spearfishing and you need to undo that loop for some reason, you can do it pretty quickly if you need to. It's also very quick to tie if you want to tie something onto your gear. Got it like that, and then even with gloves on you can just pull it apart. So this bungee is held on with a couple of Albright knots, and if you'd like to see how to do those Albright knots, I'll show you now. Okay, so the next knot I'm going to show you now is the Albright knot. Now this is a way of joining a thin and a thick piece of rope. In this case you can see this is how I've tied the bungee on. So usually in spearfishing people tie bungees on by using a constrictor knot and sort of a ball bearing in there. There's no need to do that. If you've got a good Albright knot, that'll never come undone, and it works really well with a nice stretchy bungee which you can get from the hardware store. Alright, so to tie the Albright knot then, we take our bungee and we fold that over. It doesn't matter whether you fold it over because you can trim off the excess later. So we fold that over to make a loop, and we take our braid and we come up through that loop like that. We go around a couple of times. And then you can, well, I'll go around again. You can go back through the same way that you've just come through, but actually it forms a better knot if you go under these ones. That sort of holds it down extra strong. So we go under the first one there, and then under the second one there, and then through that hole in the same direction as the initial string. So it should look a little bit like that. Okay, it doesn't look very good at the moment, but once you pull that tight and these things clinch on, it'll become a very, very strong knot. So sort of, while it's a bit loose, you can reposition them, pull it up near the end. If you need to change this thicker rope around, pull it through or something like that, you can do that now. Because once you pull that tight and it bears down on itself, it'll be a very, very strong knot. The other thing that I recommend is that you tie, that when you first go round, you go around the line that it's going to be attached to, not the one you're going to trim off. And that way it's biting down the most on where the pressure is going to be, like this you see, and this one is just coming off the side. So now that it's where I want it to be, I give that a decent tug on one side and a decent tug on the other, do both together, and then that has really bitten down on itself. It's made its own little collar here, and that will not come undone. You of course can trim that off there and trim off the excess there, and there is your Albright knot, and that's how you attach a bungee to a spearfishing line. You'll notice also that these pneumatic spear guns, they often come with this thick monofilament. I don't use that. I find it gets tangled up, and if it runs across a rock it gets damaged quite easily and can break. So I go to the hardware store and get this very thin braid. It seems to be much stronger. It's much easier to tie knots in. And you can get it of any length as well. So it's pretty good stuff. I highly recommend doing that. And lastly, you can see here that I've added an extra metre or so of line on. And I'll show you the knot that I've used. This is like a really low profile knot, so it's not going to get in the way, and it's unbelievably strong. So if you want to see how to do that knot, here it is. So then to join two ropes together, there are lots and lots of different knots that you can use to do this, but I wanted to use quite a low profile knot, obviously, because on the spear gun you don't want the knot to get into the way. So the one that I've used, you just take one string and you tie a simple granny knot around that string like that, and then you do the same on the other side, just an overhand knot or whatever they call them, like that, and they can both slip, and as the two contact together they tighten each other up. And become a very, very strong knot. Now you know that's not exactly low profile there, so there's a better way of doing it, which I'll show you. Rather than just having a plain granny knot, you do one of these little sort of noose knots. So you go round a couple of times and then back under itself, and through the same hole as the running line like that. Pull that tight, and that way when these two knots bear down on one another, you've got the excess line can be trimmed as it's coming out the back end and not out the side. So I'll do the same here. So again, it's just a little noose knot. You make a loop, you go around a couple of times, and then under itself and out the same place, and then pull it tight. So you can see I've got these two knots, and when they bear down on one another, they will self-tighten and become quite a low profile knot. This is of course a very thick line. If you've got braid or something like that, it ends up being a lot thinner. You can cut off that extra, it's not going to slip any further than that. The other way you can do it is called a blood knot, which is very similar, but the blood knot you have these coming out of the middle, which could get caught as it's going through the mechanism on the spear gun. So I find this one, once those are trimmed off, is a very low profile knot suitable for spearfishing. So then to load the gun in the water, I'll just hook this over the front. This is very near to where the line is going to be from the spear. So I'll just hook that over the front there, come back and do that 3 times. Now this one here, you can see it's not, I've done it so it's not quite long enough, and that's where the rubber bungee comes in. So in the water I just stretch that over and then it's taut. Right, so here is the Cressy SL that doesn't have a reel. The setup here is just slightly more complicated. The reel, of course, you can trim this off slightly, so it doesn't need to be as exact. But this one, I'll show you how I've got the length. So firstly, to vary the length, I've got this knot here which can slide. Now I've put it between 2 other knots on that line, and this knot here can slide up and down. So if I want the knot to be further this way, I can slide that along and then make that longer, or I can have it shorter like that, and that just means that when I'm in the water I can change the length, well, I can tighten up the line. If it's too loose I can just put that along. I've put these 2 on here, these 2 little ones, to keep it in a certain range, and that just means when I'm out at sea I can see this is the maximum and this is the minimum here, and I can just do it with my gloves and I'm not sort of fumbling around. Okay, the next knot then is a runner knot or a noose knot. So I want to create a loop here that I can expand and contract, and that will vary the length of my rope so I can fit it onto the spear. So what I need to do then is to tie a noose around this section here so that it can slip up and down. So there's various ways of doing this. The way that I like to do it, cross over here first and then go round several times to create that sort of noose-like appearance. Okay, like that. And then I actually go down through the middle of that and out the bottom, just where the other line has come out the bottom as well. And then so if I pull that tight, you can see it's like a noose, and it will slip up and down the line like that. If it's slipping too much, you just have to tighten it slightly here. So what you do then is on your spear gun you have this knot, and you have that attached to the spear or something, and if the line is too loose then you can draw this back and take up that excess line within the knot. So you'll notice with both of the guns I just have this loop. Now I'll explain that in a moment, but firstly I've got 2 complete lengths of this line, and that is connected again to a bungee. Now this bungee I buy from the local hardware store. It's really strong and can stretch to double its length, and I've tied that on with a couple of Albright knots. So you would have already seen how to do those. And then at the end here I just have a bowline knot, but the advantage of this bowline is that I can just push it off the end and it has a quick release function. So if, for example, I shot a shark or something like that, or I could release that and just let the rope go. I've used that a few times. Sometimes if I shoot a fish and the fish is actually down on the rope here, I can take it off there and pull the rope all the way through the fish and take the fish off, and then to put it back on I can do this with gloves under the water. I just need to push that end through there and just loop it over the end. That's really solid. Of course it's pulling this way, but it's very solid. They'll never come off. I've tied the bowline so that there's only just enough to get just off the end there. You see that? And that way, if it did sort of come loose like this in the water, it's still not likely to make its way over the end. Okay, so I mentioned a moment ago that both of my guns, I just have a loop on the end here. So rather than having a string directly attached to the spear, I have the spear like this. I have a bowline knot here, which in emergency I can undo if I need to. And I have that just long enough that it will come off the end of the spear, like that. So whichever way the spear goes, that's going to be alright. And so I've got a loop. Now what that enables me to do is that I can break the line at this point. So if I shoot a fish and this end here goes right through the fish and the fish is sitting on the line, I can break it here and take the fish off and then redo the knot. So the kind of knot that I'm using is called a clinch knot, and the way to do that, you can do this in the water with your gloves. You just hold it, pull a bit of line through, you hold it here, you go around once, and then you put what's called a bite or a fold through that hole there, and then you pull from this end and it clinches down like that. Looks a bit feeble, but it's actually very strong. You can put another couple of twists in if you like, but this is just the simplest way to do the knot for demonstration purposes. So you go out there, you're fishing, and you shoot a fish, and let's say the fish has come down here somewhere on the line. With your gloves in the water, you grab that, pull it, and it'll come loose, and you can just slip the fish off. And then grab it here, go around, and then rather than putting that through, you put a bite through and pull from that side. And there it is again. So I have the same setup then on the Predator. I've got a bowline knot here that can go either side, a loop with another bowline which in an emergency can be undone quickly, and I put it through. So grab it here, go around, and then I put a bite through that hole there and pull it from this end to clinch down on itself like that. And then when the fish is on there with your gloves, just yank that and it comes undone. Well, that's it for the Speargun setup video. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something, and we'll see you next time. Bye.